Hey, how's it going everyone? In today's video I'm going to teach you how to create a custom drop-down menu using HTML, CSS and JavaScript. Now let me also quickly show you how this project will work. Basically we're going to have up here a title, then a input. This is actually an input tag which is going to serve as the drop-down menu. From here we can select whatever is in the drop-down menu. Now as soon as we click on this, you will see that the right arrow, instead of showing down, will show upwards. The background color will change, and also the text color is actually not going to change, but we're going to have our drop down, which is going to be shown then. Also, the content of the drop down will have a hover effect on whichever item in the drop down menu we're going to hover over. The background color is going to change, and the text color is also going to change. Now, this right side scroll bar right here, we're going to program in ourselves. We're going to style it ourselves, and also when we're going to select something, it is not only going to show here, but also up here, where it's also going to show the title or the item description and the JavaScript, not the JavaScript, and the icon, which we just selected. Basically, if we would change this, then this would also change with our selector. Not only that this drop-down menu will disappear when we select something, but also when we deselect it. So this is going to be a totally different functionality. Okay, so hope you're excited for the project. If you are, give me a thumbs up button. If you're not, give me a thumbs down. Also, if you're new to the channel and you want to learn web development, then please consider subscribing and also clicking that notification bell in order to get notified whenever I post a new video. So with this being said, I'm going to remove my face and let's get started with the project. Okay, I'm going to take the finished project and just move it to the side. And I think this should be enough. Don't need that much of a space. And I have Visual Studio Code open, and also I created a empty folder. You can name it whatever you want. I just named it custom dropdown with HTML, CSS and JavaScript. Within here, let's get started by creating our very first file, which will be the index.html file. Then I'm also going to create a style.css and a main.js. You can name it app.js, you can name it whatever you want. Okay, let's go back to our index.html and let's do our setup. Now, the entire code for this video will be in the description below. As always, you will find it on my blog. We are going to use Font Awesome, and from Google Fonts, we are going to use this font right here. You can obviously change the font if you wish later on, or use a completely different font. You can use Roboto, you can use Poppins, whatever you want. Now, let's get started by creating a boilerplate. So this is Shift exclamation mark, hit enter. Let's give this the title of custom and drop down, and then above our title we're going to link up our style.css, and we're also going to go to font awesome, and we're going to go to grab onto the CDN. So cdnjs.com, and from the libraries you're going to select the very first link, but as I said, everything will be down in the description below. So let's copy in the link for Font Awesome, and then down in our body, we can actually also upload it right here. Right after our style tag, I'm going to import our script, so our JavaScript file, script.main.js. Okay, so we're good to go. Let me also, I'm going to close this up and open up another site, Font Awesome. And from here, we're going to grab onto our icons. Now let's go ahead, go down into our body. And you know what? I'm going to close up the right part. You can hold down Command on a Mac and press B, or Control on a PC and press B, and this will hide the navigation bar or the Explorer bar on the left side. So first things first, we're going to create a container class. So .container is going to create a div with the class of container. Within this div with the class of container, we're going to create our title h1 and let's say custom dropdown. Underneath of this, we're going to create our, let me show you in the finished project, our select box right here. Now, you know what? I'm going to right click, open with live server. This is just extension live server. If you want to have exactly the same extensions, that I do, then please check out my video on how I set up my Visual Studio Code on my YouTube channel. So this is just one extension for Visual Studio Code, which is the live server. It's just going to give you a server that is going to constantly watch your project. Okay, so this is our project, custom dropdown. Let's go ahead. Underneath our custom dropdown, let's create another div set with the class of select and box. And within here, we're going to create two main actually one div and one unordered list. So the div, the very first div will be the input. So let's call this dot input dash container. Now this input container will contain our input right here. So within our input container, I'm going to create an input tag. So input, I'm going to leave the type as text, and I'm going to give this the class of the selected input. So let's call it, should I leave it input or yeah, let's call it select. Selected, because this is what will be selected when we select something from our dropdown. You say JavaScript, and this is going to show the selected item. Now this is just naming context. You could give it whatever class you wish. Now in order to have the text within our input tag, we are going to create here a placeholder. Now the placeholder is going to display a default text. It's going to be select a programming and language, and basically this is what we're going to have in our input bar. Now right after our input box, I'm going to create a icon text. So basically we could just go ahead, go to Font Awesome. Let's go here, search, and we're going to search for arrow, and we're going to search for arrow down. Okay, here's arrow down. Click on arrow down, then click on this, which is going to copy it to the clipboard, and you just paste it in right here. Okay, now if we go back to our project, there we have it. There's the arrow. Now also I'm going to give this a ID. So ID arrow, because I'm going to grab onto this ID later on. Now you're asking yourself, what about arrow up? Aren't we inserting an arrow up? Well, no, because we're going to take care of this class. Let me just show you something. The arrow up is just exactly the same class, but with the arrow up class. Okay. Now we're going to not insert it within here, but we're going to change it using JavaScript later on. So we have our very first div, which is this input container. Now, you know what? Underneath our input container, I want to create our list. Basically this list right here, so our options. Now let's go underneath our input container, so that div, let's create a UL with a class of options and dash container. Within our options container, I'm going to create multiple options. So I'm going to use li list items with the class of option, and this is going to include, so greater than, the greater than sign, a icon tag with the class of fa brands, and then some sort of brand as a text. Now I'm going to wrap this entire thing into parentheses. Let me just do it like this. Go outside of it and multiply it. Let's just see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So 9 times. And there we go. We're going to get 9 list items. And if we take a look, here we're going to have 9 brands. Now, this is almost it for our HTML. All we need to do now is insert here, after our FA brands, the icon for each text. So the very first one is going to be HTML. Okay, so if you take a look here, it's going to be HTML. Then we're going to have CSS, so far and so on. Now, just to save a bit of time, I'm going to show you the first two. So if you go, for example, back to Font Awesome and search for HTML, then you're going to get these icons. So let's click on HTML5, click on this. If you wish, then you could copy the icon, but I will just use, and wait just a second, this is not correct. This is not correct. You know why? Because the text is within the icon tag, and it should be right after the icon tag. So I'm going to take this, cut it out, paste it right in here. You also paste it within here. Whoa, not you, but within, hey, we're missing something. Okay, so let me take this one out. Why isn't this working? I'm going to delete you, copy you, paste you down here, and you'll be CSS. So once again, we just need, after our FA brands, which you see right here, a FA HTML5. So if let me also show you in our finished project. So in our project right here, if I type in here space FA HTML5, then it's going to give me the HTML5 icon. Now, if you want to have a bit of space, then you just need to put a space between them. So I'm not going to do this. The next one would be FA CSS free. Hit save. You're going to have the CSS free icon and a bit of space. So I'm not going to do This for all of them. Just going to copy and paste them in. And as I said, they are down in the description below, so you can just copy and paste them in if you want. Okay, so here are all of our icons for Rust, SQL, Python, Node.js, TypeScript. Actually, for TypeScript, I couldn't find the icon. I couldn't find the icon for TypeScript within Font Awesome. I would need to use something else, but I'm going to stick with Font Awesome. Then for CSS, JavaScript, CSS, and HTML. Okay, so this is basically all the HTML that we need for now. Now we can close. Nah, I don't want to close this up, but we can move now to CSS. Within CSS, first things first, as always, I'm going to do a general reset. You can see we have a couple of margins and paddings that we don't wish to have within here. So if you type star, then open close curly brackets, you're basically targeting the root of everything. So this is the general selector, the star selector. If I type in margin and assign it to 0, you're going to get 0 for all of the elements. Padding basically is the same, not auto, but 0. 0 padding, and we're going to assign everything to a box sizing of border box and take out all of those little, you can not see them anymore. So let me show you. Padding is on now. You can see these dots. So if I do a list, style type, and I'm going to set them to none, and they're gone. And now I'm going to also take out the padding. We don't wish to have this. Okay. Now, another thing, I'm going to use variables within here. So using variables, if you later on wish to change any kind of color, you could do so by just replacing the variable. Now I'm going to target the root, and within here, I'm going to set a couple of variables. Now, in order to create a variable, hyphen, the name of the variable, we're going to call the first one BG, then column, and then hexadecimal. Now we can use RGB or named colors within here. Use whatever you want. I'm going to use F6, F6, and FF. This is just a white color. And let me just show you how you can also use variables. Going to target our body, and within our body, going to set the background to a var, and then BG. And this is going to change the background color. Got it? Now, next up, the next variable will be a light color. So I'm just going to type in light, and I'm going to give this a hexadecimal C6CD C0. Now, obviously, I don't know them. I don't know these colors. Obviously, I don't know these colors. Now, obviously, I have written down these colors, and I also have my finished code up and running. So you don't have to remember all of these hexadecimal colors. Now, the next one will be a mid color, so mid-range. It's going to be a greenish color, so 0 hex 1, 6, 9, and 6, 0. Okay, now the next one is going to be a dark color. This is going to be dark. I'm going to use here a hexadecimal color of 293 A4, and there we go. That's all that we need. Actually, no, I do want to have another variable. I'm going to use this more often in this project. So box shadow. Basically, I'm going to create a specific box shadow that I'm going to use multiple times within the project. So box, this is why variables are so useful, because you can reuse them. Shadow, don't have to type out everything. 0, 0, 0, 0, 10 pixels, 1 pixel, and a RGBA of 0, 0, 0, and 0.2 for the opacity. Hey, there you go. Now I'm also going to import from Google Fonts. So let's go Google Fonts, and I'm going to select from here. Actually, I have to make this a bit larger in order for you to see this. I'm going to deselect everything, and I'm going to select the grape nuts. There we go. This font right here. So I'll just click on select this style. It's going to be inserted within here. Then you're going to go, either you can import it using the link, or click on import, copy everything that is between those style tags. Click on copy, then go to your project. Let me make this smaller again. Paste it in above our body, and then let's assign these two font families. Copy them in. Go ahead, and now it should work. There we go. And you can take out actually pop-ins. We don't need this. So we have our font up and running. Next thing, we're going to take care of this H1, because this H1 should be a bit further down. So let's do a, you know what, let's first of all take care of the container. So the class of container, which contains everything, let's give this a margin from the top of 100 pixels. And let's also give it a bit of padding a all around padding, or let's say 2 rem, and that should be enough. If you want, you can also do a free rem. Free rem also looks good. Now let's go to our H1 and let's give this also a all around margin, and we could do 1 rem. Let's see. Yeah, but I want to take out the margin from the left side, so I'm going to go margin, and left, and I'm going to assign this to 0. Okay, now it's pushed to the left completely. And the last thing, I want to change the color. So color, I'm going to change it to the var of dark. Okay, now let's take care of our select box. So let me scroll up here, select the class of, where do you have it? Select and box. And let's go in here. Hey, I don't need you. So class, select box, and say display. I'm going to display this as flex because I have 2 items. Let me just show you. Within our, this is our container. So if I close this one up, you will don't notice. You can close specific portion of the code up, and this will also indicate from where to where it reaches. So within our select box, we have this div, which is the input container, and the UL, which is the options container. So I'm going to display them as flex. After that, I'm going to change the flex direction to a column. And then I'm going to assign them a width of 400 pixels. So basically, I'm going to limit their width. Now I'm going to take the options container, which is this right here. Now I'm going to take this selected class. So the input selected. I'm missing an E here. So selected. And I'm going to first of all position it relative. Because later on, I want to position this arrow absolute within this input. Now I'm going to give this the width of width of 100% of its container. This is going to basically take out those 400 pixels, and we'll just play around a bit with it. Now we can change its border, second border, and radius. I'm going to assign this to 8 pixels. I'm going to give it 8 pixel border. I'm going to change the border itself. And let's give this a color of solid, so 1 pixel solid, and var. I'm going to go with the mid color. Now let's create a bit of space with this input tag. Now let's create a bit of space between our inputs or selected and this list down here. So let's do a margin bottom 10 pixels. And if you wish to do more, then it's up to you. Now let's change the color of the text to, first of all, let's go with this whitish color. Okay, now for the box shadow, in order to make this pop out a bit, you can see it has a bit of a shadow. I'm going to just type in box shadow and use the variable of box shadow, and this will automatically assign it the box shadow that I assigned up here. Now let's take care of the placeholder, because we can also style the placeholder by just selecting the selected class and then placeholder within it. And also we're going to grab onto this later on using JavaScript. So let's change its color to the variable color of mid. Okay, so we have a greenish color now, and let's increase its font weight to 600. Now as you can see, we don't have too much space within here, so let's just give this a bit of a padding of, let's say, 12 pixels and 24 pixels, basically double. Okay, so this is starting to look better. Next up, let's take care of this arrow. So I'm going to select the ID of arrow by using hash arrow. Basically, this is how you select an ID. And from here, we're going to change the color of the arrow to a variable of dark. Now, we need to position it absolute. So position absolute. And we can now play around with it by typing it that its positions should be from the right 12 pixels and from the top, let's also say 12. Let me just do this up here. Input dash container. I'm going to position this relative. And now the arrow is down here. Now, one last thing, because I'm here, when we're going to have the class of FA arrow dash up, I want to change that color to the variable color of BG. Okay, and I'm also going to set this as important so it cannot be overwritten. So when this arrow is going to have the class of FA arrow up, it's going to have a different color. Now let's continue on and style this part right here, which is our options container. So Let me also show you in HTML. This options container, we're going to grab onto this class, target it within our CSS. Let me also scroll up a bit. First things first, we're going to change its background color. So background, you can also change just background. Background, let's say var, and we're going to use the dark color. Then obviously we need to change the text. We're going to use var. Again, we're going to use a light color. You can use BG or light, whichever you want. I'm going to use the BG color. Now, I do want this container to take up the entire width, although it seems so, but believe me, it is better if you hard code this in. So with 100%. Okay, now I'm going to change the opacity to 0. You won't see anything, so I'm going to comment this part out. I'm going to go up here and also hit save again. This opacity 0 will help us. Let me show you something. When I click on this, just look at how it comes in. You can see it kind of comes in from invisible to visible. And this is by creating this opacity 0, and later on we're going to assign it a opacity of 1. So let me go back here. Then this transformation should take 0.5 seconds, and I'm going to assign it to all of the transformations that are going to take place. Now let's also give it a border radius of 8 pixels, exactly the same thing as we have up here. And let's do a overflow of hidden. Okay, we're almost done with this. I'm going to, as I said, leave this opacity. Actually, let me move this upwards. So you can select everything and just hold down Option on a Mac or Alt on a PC and arrows up. And later on, we're also going to give it a max height of 0. I'm going to do this, but also comment it out. Next up, when this will be his default state, and the option container's default state is actually to not show, to have this opacity 0 and max width of 0, or max height, sorry about that. But when this option container will have a class of active, then its max height will be 240 pixels, so it's not going to be the entire height. The border, we're going to change the border, we're going to give it a 1 pixel solid, and the variable color of dark. And I'm also going to give this a box shadow of var box shadow, obviously. Now, as I said, when it's going to come in, it's going to change its opacity from 0 to 1. And we'll also have now a overflow on the y-axis of scroll. Okay, basically on this axis. This is the x-axis, the horizontal axis, and the vertical axis are the y-axis. So in order to show you how we can create this, if I can take a look in our finished project, this right here, we are going to need a couple of WebKits. So let's go ahead and target this .options container, and the property for creating such a scroll will be WebKit and then scroll bar. First things first, we're going to give this scroll bar a width, which is going to be just 8 pixels. Then we're going to give it a background of, let's see, I could use this. So var and light color, and a border radius of 0, 8 pixels, 8 pixels, and 0. Now, in order to see that, I'm going to just copy, let me actually copy it like this, paste it in. For our scroll bar, we also need that thumb, which is going to be thumb, and this just going to have a background color of that dark. Let's use mid. Let's use the mid color. Now, the last thing I want to, actually not the last thing, but in order to be finished with this part, we're going to style the select box. We're going to style the options from the select box. So options, and I want each options to have a padding of 12 pixels and 24 pixels. So basically exactly the same padding as we had up here, and the scroll, the cursor will be pointer. So whenever I go over a option, the cursor is going to be pointer. Now when I hover over a option, so let's select our hover, I'm going to change the background color, so background, and I'm going to use var, and I'm going to set the background color to be BG, and the color of the text to be var and dark. Okay, so if I hover over a option, going to change the background to a white background, or whatever we set this, and the text to whatever we set this. So if you're wondering why this scroll isn't showing, let me just show you something. Let's comment back these two. So let me come back this and this, which is going to make this disappear. Let's go now into our HTML, and we said when our option container has the class of active, then this is not showing. Option container class of active, then the max height, not the width. Height should be 240, and there we go. There's our scroll bar. But it's not the color that I wanted. Wait just a second. Dark. No, not dark. Okay, and now the thumb is showing and we can scroll through it. Great. So only when this class active exists, this class right here. Now I'm going to delete it. I'm going to hide our scroll bar. Now let's go into our JavaScript file. And the next step will be to open and close our tab right here, and then to make it selectable. So first things first, let's get DOM elements. Now I'm going to create a couple of variables. Let's create first one. Let's use const. I'm going to grab onto selected. From this, I'm going to go to the document, use query selector, and I'm going to grab onto the class of .selected. Now if you're not familiar with selecting elements from the DOM, I do have a video on my channel, so please check it out. You will have there all of the selectors. Next up, we're going to create another one, const. I'm going to name this the options container, because I want to grab onto that one also. And I misspelled options. Options container. There we go. Now again, go to the document, query selector, and we're going to select the class of options and container. Next up will be the options themselves, which we're going to assign to a const with the name of options and list. Now within here, we need to select multiple options. So document dot, we need to use query selector all. And this will select all of the classes that have the class name of option. And the last thing that we need is our arrow. And we're just going to use const. We're going to name this arrow. And we're going to go ahead, go to the document and use query selector again. You could also use get element by ID and select the ID of arrow. Again, if you want to learn more about selectors, I have everything on my channel. Good. So we're done with this part. We have everything that we want in our selected within here. And just to prove it, we're going to open up our console, right click, inspect on the page, go to console. No, not to that. Console. There we go. And in our console log, let's go ahead and copy in selected, comma, options container, comma, option list, and comma, arrows. And we should get null, null, null. What? So this means that I didn't select them. Why is this? Why is that? Why is that? Not list, which is awesome. Empty. Script main.js. Main.js. You know what? The script should be down here in order to be able to select the DOM. Because if the script is up there, the script is loading before the HTML page. So we have our script down in our body now, and we get our elements. Input with the class of selected, the UL list with the options, the option themselves, and then that icon. Okay, let's go back into JavaScript. And first things first, we're going to use two event listeners. So we're going to grab onto the selected, and then dot on focus will be our first event listener. We're going to assign this to an arrow function, and this will, let's just console log, let's type in here focus. So this will console log the string of focus if I focus on selected. So let's see if this works. Let me comment out the above console log. So if I click in here, then it's focused and it's going to console log focus. Now I'm going to use another function which is going to be on blur. So instead of on focus, I'm going to replace this blur. Okay, basically blur works if you defocus something. So I clicked in here, we have focus. If I click outside of this input tag, I'm going to get blur. Basically, I'm no longer focusing this input tag. Now I can click outside of it as long as I want. This is not going to be fired. It's only going to be fired when I'm not focusing this specific element. So when we're focusing, let me comment out these two console logs, but I'm going to leave them in there for you to have. When I'm focusing this input tag, then I want to select it. So basically that whatever I'm focusing, it's style.background color to change And I don't know if you know this, but you can use within JavaScript also the CSS variables. And we're going to change it to the var dark color. So let's see if this works. So if I focus it in here, then it's changing. Now if I defocus this, then it's going to remain the same. So this means we're going to copy this code down here in our blur, and I'm going to move this down, and I'm going to change it back to initial. Okay, so I'm focusing, defocusing, focusing, defocusing, or blurring. Now let's go ahead and open up our container down here, because this is what we want to achieve, our custom dropdown. For this, we're going to grab onto options dot the options container, and we're going to grab onto its class list. Now from here, we're going to toggle the class of active. Basically, if I'm going to focus in here, click, then it's going to toggle, give this options container, so basically the options container, the class of active. If I'm going to click once more within here, then it's going to remove it. It's going to, basically, this is what toggle means. It's going to edit, and then it's going to remove it once more in there. So how about clicking in there, clicking outside of it in order for this to disappear? So we just need to copy this down here. This means if I click in here, it's going to open it. If I click outside of our selected input tag, that is going to disappear. Basically, it's going to toggle the active class again. Now, how about this arrow? Let's go down here and let's create an if statement. So let's say if the arrow, which we grabbed on up here, dot class list dot contains the class of fa dash arrow dash down. So let's take a look. If this arrow with the ID of arrow contains this class, let's go back here, then the arrow, we're going to grab onto it again, we're going to grab onto its class list again, we're going to then remove that class of fa dash arrow dash down. And in order for this not to be class list, we're going to copy this and say we're going to add the arrow up class. So hope you understand what I just did. We're going to check when I'm focusing in here. So if I click in here, I'm not going to click right now because I'm trying to explain something. If I click in here, then first of all, the background is going to change, the options will be triggered, so the class is going to change on this right here on the options container, and then it's going to check if the arrow has the class of arrow down, which it does have. If it does have it, then it's going to remove it, and it's going to add after it a class of arrow up. So let's click in here, and you can see the arrow up appearing. Now if I click outside, then nothing happens because it's going to stay as this class. So all we need to do is copy this down into a blur, and we have to switch this to this three up. So basically this will be up, this will be up, and this will be down. It's going to do exactly the reverse thing of whatever this is doing up here. So this means if I click in here, it's going to change the class. If I click outside, it's going to change the class back. And that's basically it. Okay, now the last thing that we need to do is make this, whatever we select within here, appear within here and replace our H1. And this is pretty simple. Let's go down here and say options. And you know what? I'm actually going to comment this one out. Select element from drop down and from drop down list actually, and display it. And display it or display selected element. Okay, now we need to grab onto the options list. Okay, the options list, which we here grabbed on to, means that we grabbed onto each of the individual items. Now we can use a forEach loop on it, and basically it's going to take in a callback function. So arrow function, and we're going to say that each item within this list is going to, because it's going to do only one thing, is going to item dot on click, going to listen for a event. So the item dot on click is going to do something. So I'm going to assign this to an arrow function. Sorry, just close it up. Now this function, let's first of all console log the item itself. Okay, so if I click on any of these items, it should console log that item. So HTML and so forth and so on. Now, how about we grab onto something from this item? How about we grab onto the inner HTML of that item? So if I click on HTML, it should give me this right here. You could also select the inner and text of the item, and it would mean if I click on HTML, it's going to give me HTML. But we will need both of them. We're going to need the inner HTML and the inner text, because the selected, from the selected, which is this right here, this input tag has the placeholder of selected programming language. Select a programming language. This is the placeholder of this input tag. This input tag has the class name of selected, and we can select from this the property of placeholder. And we can assign this placeholder the items.inner text. Okay, so basically if I click here and click on HTML, it's going to give me HTML instead of selected programming language. Click on CSS, it's going to give me that. If I click on CSS, and so on and so on. So are we done yet? No, we're not. We also want to change this up here, to change the H1. For this, we're just going to go ahead, go to the document and grab onto this H1 using query selector. I'm going to grab on the H1 tag because we have only one tag, and it's going to grab onto the very first tag. I'm going to just grab onto the tag of it. So I'm not going to use a class or a ID, which would be much better, but I'm going to use the tag itself. Now I selected the H1, and now I can say that its inner HTML will be the items item inner HTML. Okay, so if I select now HTML, it's going to replace it right here. And okay, so that's basically it. Let us also take a look at this a bit larger. I'm going to close our console, hit the refresh. We have our H1 custom dropdown, and if we click it in here, we could select whatever item we wish, and then it will be displayed up here as selected. Okay, that's pretty much it for our custom dropdown. Hope you enjoyed this project. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, give it a thumbs down. Again, the code is down in the description below. Also, if you're new to the channel, then please consider subscribing and also clicking that notification bell in order to get notified whenever I post new videos. With this being said, take care and catch you on the flip side. Bye bye.